talk to each other then?
Yeah, we just talk to each other.
Okay.
I'm with my friend Brian Page,
Mhm.
and we're just going to have a conversation. So, yeah, I mean, you're basically a professional voice actor.
Correct.
So we want to hear your voice today.
All right, very good.
But we want to try to bring out kind of what my area of expertise is and how I believe I can help people in different situations.
Very good. And I am curious about what it is you do exactly in business, in your relationship with China and America businesses.
Yeah, well, so I can actually, my background is obviously, you can tell from my accent that I was born and raised in the US. But I started working in Asia in 1996. So basically for the last 20 plus years, I've been doing business in a cross-cultural situation. So in my professional life, but also in my personal life, I've been married twice. My ex-wife is Taiwanese. I met her on my first overseas assignment in 1996 when I was a country manager in Taiwan. We were married for 7 years. And my current wife, who I met in the US, was originally from mainland China. And we've now been married for almost 7 years. So my experience in trying to resolve cultural differences extends not only through my personal relationships, but also through my business relationships.
So what's the first common sense areas that you would instruct an American business who wanted to start doing business in China? What would you have them do initially to get started?
Well, what I really get involved is obviously the world's two largest economies are the United States and China. And there's also currently a trade war between these two nations that basically could affect everybody on the planet. If you are a business person and let's just take American. I mean, you could be from any country outside of China, but let's just say you're an American and you've been assigned by your company to go over to China. In that scenario, you are obviously in a leadership role, okay? And you are obviously selected by your company to go to China because of your previous leadership experience, right? China is a huge market. For most companies, it's their most important market outside of their home market. So like Apple's largest market is now China, right? So when they send their executives over there, number one, there's high expectations of their executives, but they also want to try to select people that they feel can achieve the results that they want in this kind of foreign market. So as an expat or a foreign manager being assigned over to work in China, you really have to understand the environment in which you are going and the people that you're going to be working with. Most people who go over there, first of all, they want to build their core team. So their core team is, if most Americans, when they first go over to China, they actually don't speak any Chinese, right? But for companies that have resources, for the market opportunities that are so large, that's really not an issue. You've been selected to go over to China not because you speak Chinese, but because you're an expert in our company and you understand our values. So we want you to establish the team in Asia or the team in China that's going to be able to translate our values and promote that into the marketplace. It sounds easy because if you're successful in your home market, you're successful in the US, you think, well, I just need to translate some brochures and I go over to China and I can be successful. But when you go to China, it's completely different. The regulatory environment is different, but that's not even the most complex challenge you're going to encounter. The most complex thing that you're going to encounter is the people that you're working with will not share the same value system as you.
Right. cultural norms will be completely different.
It's more than cultural norms. Cultural norms can be learned. Like, do you bow? How do you exchange business cards? Who speaks first? What's considered polite and what's not considered polite? Those are the very basic things, the ceremonial things. So in Chinese culture, there's a lot of ceremonial things, a lot of rites that goes back thousands of years of how people behave. So for example, you're a foreigner, you're a guest, you will be treated a certain way from the moment you get off the plane.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we're having dinner together, there's a certain seating arrangement where you as the foreign guest will sit. Usually you will sit on the right side of the host because you are kind of a guest of honor. So even if you're going over there and you're assembling the team, or there's some people there already in place, what's going to happen is when you first arrive in China, you're going to experience what I call the honeymoon period. Okay? So during this honeymoon period, you're going to be chauffeured around. Everybody that you interact with is going to be extremely accommodating. Everybody wants to know more about you. Everybody wants to know what you like to eat, what you like to do, what your habits are. They're going to try to accommodate your every need. Okay? Now, sometimes this could be at the company's expense because the local people still, expense the transportation and the hotels and the restaurants, but you're going to get a sense that you're going to be taken care of almost like a king. And most visitors here in the U.S. don't receive that type of treatment. You may have one dinner out of a weekly business trip, but most of the time you have your per diem and you're back to the hotel and you're on your own.
Right.
That's generally not going to happen in China. So what's going to happen is in China, you're gonna get this false sense of how accommodating and how agreeable people are. And what you have to understand is this is part of the Chinese system of reciprocity in giving and receiving face. So you as a foreign executive going to China, people are going to want to give you a lot of respect and a lot of face.
Mm-hmm.
And because they don't know exactly what you like and how you think, they're just going to try to anticipate everything. Okay? What happens is over time, when the honeymoon period is over, then it's time to do real work. Okay? And a lot of times what happens is once the people who have been accommodating you and catering to you and making arrangements for you, they also report to you. After they've kind of taken care of all your social needs and your personal needs and your dietary needs, and even that of your children and family if you bring them over, then they feel you kind of owe them a favor. Chinese culture is based on a system of reciprocity and the giving and receiving of face. A lot of Westerners assume there's a lot of corruption in that because in Chinese culture, the giving and receiving of face often includes a lot of gift giving or exchange of money. And we as Westerners, we view that as corrupt by default because we don't do that here. We don't give each other money. We don't give each other gifts when we see each other for the first time, right? That's just not part of the American culture.
Right.
When that happens in China, it's part of the culture. And when the Chinese people that you're working with, your local staff, your local team, even the other local managers, when they're doing that for you during the honeymoon period, there is an expectation that that will be repaid. Okay, so what you will experience is you will experience a lot of requests, a lot of kind of special requests, a lot of requests to localize, a lot of requests for things to be different because they don't really work with the local market in China. And the thing that's most challenging for most foreigners is those requests have merit, but they may also be based on kind of just personal preferences. And the most difficult thing that foreigners face is they don't know whether to follow the advice that they are getting. because a lot of the advice is based on personal benefit and personal preference. Whereas most leaders will go over there and they will think, well, I've been doing this in 15 countries all across the world, and that was never necessary. I don't believe that's necessary in China either, right? That's the attitude that a lot of foreign leaders have. Says, well, what's so special about China? I've worked in Japan, I've worked in Korea, I've worked in Germany. What's so special about China? And it's that attitude that makes it really difficult to actually get to the next level of what we call in China guanxi relationships. Okay, guanxi relationships is built purely or solely on this system of reciprocity, giving and receiving. And what most foreigners don't understand is there are other ways to give face other than to be agreeable, right? To agree to a request, just to do that is really oversimplifying what the other side actually expects. Sometimes the other person just needs acknowledgement or recognition, or they want more inclusion, or they want higher levels of responsibility. If you are a decision maker, all of those factors can be used to extend goodwill to the people you need to actually execute for you in the China market. So when you go into the assumption, when you make it black or white, no, we can't do that. No, I don't think it's necessary to do that. When you make a problem or a request, when you make it black or white, yes or no, you're creating a disadvantage for yourself, because what you've impeded is you've actually kind of stifled the conversation. But what you've actually done is you've actually cut off many avenues to exchange goodwill, to create the system of reciprocity. And once you cut those channels off by looking at requests in a yes, no, black or white, either or situation, then that's the mistake that most foreigners make. They think requests require a yes and no answer. But in China, it's never about yes and no. So just tell you a little bit of the story. My first time in mainland China was 2004. And when I went there, I have other kind of family connections and relationships, so I'm not going to get into the details, but I had the opportunity when I first arrived in China and started doing business there, I had the opportunity to sit with David Chang. You probably don't know who David Chang is, but David Chang is the China CEO of Philips. So Philips is a huge, they make medical devices, they make shavers, they make TVs, they make all kinds of products. Mm-hmm. And they had, 40,000 employees in China. It's one of their largest markets. Being a Dutch company, they were one of the early companies that were really successful in China. So David Chang was the CEO, and I got to sit into the conference room of his conference room in Shanghai privately, and he was giving me advice. And he told me, Gene, in order to be successful in China, you have to learn to manage the different shades of gray, because nothing in China is black or white. And that advice has stuck with me for the last 14 years of trying to explain why certain behaviors in China actually cause a disadvantage. You think you're being a strong leader by making a decision or putting your foot down, saying, no, we're an ethical company, we have guidelines on what behavior is acceptable and unacceptable, we can't do that. There's also a situation where you don't have to do that, but you also don't have to reject it out of hand.
So this system of reciprocity, is it just, it's ongoing constantly, just never ceases, or how does that interplay continue? I mean, you mentioned the honeymoon period, and where I assume that's mostly from their side giving to a Western business person, for
Right.
instance. And then does that last for a specific period of time that's in the mind of the Chinese business people, or is that?
No, that's a very interesting question. So the honeymoon period, it's hard to say how long it lasts. It can last anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months. But from the perspective of you going over, the honeymoon period is ended when people start complaining to you.
Start complaining.
Yeah, when they start saying, this is, you need to do this, if you could do this, this would really help. We're not able to achieve this kind of success because the company has an X, Y, and Z.
Okay, assuming a business person then follows your advice, for instance, and pays attention and starts, playing in those areas of gray.
Yeah.
And responds accordingly to the local business people. Does the system then kind of flourish on its own, or does it?
Yeah, so back to your original question, the system of reciprocity between two people in China who have developed this guanxi relationship is never ending. Okay.
Is there a scorecard kept?
There isn't a scorecard, but there is kind of like a proverbial goodwill account. Okay, so every time I do something for you, your account balance is negative. You return that goodwill to me, back to me. Your account balance goes back to zero, or it goes to the other side where it's positive, where I have to return something back to you. So the way to think of this goodwill system of reciprocity is you want to achieve two things. You want to keep your account in balance, which means you don't want to give too much, but you want to keep it active. You want a lot of transactions within this goodwill account. And people don't develop guanxi relationships overnight. The guanxi relationships are strengthened over a lot of shared experiences and a lot of exchange of a goodwill. It's kind of just like, this is what binds us together. The fact that we have so many transactions and so much shared experience. It's only the course of those transactions, the exchange of goodwill and the exchange of experiences, that in China, trust is developed. In China, so there's a lot of things that are different between China and the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so relatively speaking, America is a country of laws, and we have institutions. We have really strong institutions that are used to enforce the laws. So generally speaking, people obey law. Okay, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's obviously people who break the law, but generally speaking, we're a nation of laws and people obey laws. In China, even though there are laws on the books, culturally speaking and based on the institutions and how they are run systemically, in China, people don't obey laws. People obey people. Because how a decision is made, let's say you have a dispute with somebody in China and it goes to court. Whether you get a decision in your favor often depends on the relationship you have with the decision maker, or the judge, or the person in a position of power. That's where the contrast between here in the U.S. and China lie. Is that even though China has laws on the books, the reason that foreigners are so frustrated that they can hire lawyers and they can do this and all of that, but a lot of times they can't get decisions according to the laws that are on the books. And the way that the Chinese people play this game is they actually just don't make a decision.
Yeah,
Okay,
well,
so
in this country, a judge can't have a relationship with either party. They have to recuse themselves.
Exactly. So that's a complete dichotomy with what goes on in China.
Right.
In China, if you don't have a relationship, you would almost have to recuse yourself. You don't make decisions in a vacuum. You make decisions based on the relationships that you have or the guanxi that you have with the stakeholders involved. So it's almost the opposite.
Mhm.
It's almost like, when you want to get goods through customs in China, you're exporting to China. The people who are clearing customs, they don't clear goods based on they've inspected the cargo, it's good to go, they stamp it and it goes. They clear goods based on what's in it for them. So a lot of people in the value chain have quote unquote good graduate relationships with people at customs. We don't care how they created that relationship, but you can be for certain that it generally involves some form of payment or what we would consider illegal payment. But what it does, it's just a hidden cost of doing business in China. If you don't pay that hidden payment or you don't have partners that are able to facilitate those transactions, your goods just take forever to get out of customs. Right? There's nothing illegal about customs people not clearing your goods. They're not telling you that we're not going to clear it.
They're
It's just held
not
up.
doing it, yeah.
So that's the game that they play in China. It's all about and this is the Chinese people not making these black and white. They're not saying, no, your goods aren't going to be able to be cleared. They're just saying, we'll get to it when we have time. And then you're stuck.
Yeah, it's a system that they've been operating on undoubtedly for a long time. And
Yeah, I mean, it's based on thousands of years of Chinese culture and Chinese guanxi. And it goes all the way back to Confucius. The way that the Confucius philosophies help maintain harmony in the society when there are such huge gaps in social class, right? So in China, you almost have 2 or 3 social classes. You have peasants, which will represent 90% of the population, and then you have the elites, people are affiliated with the emperor, and then you have all the fiefdoms and the government officials who report up, right? And so this system of guanxi and reciprocity comes from that. And basically laws, so the emperor could basically arbitrarily make laws because the emperor also decided what's right and what's wrong. So that's where the whole thing comes from, where in China, people obey people don't obey laws. Now, a lot of that is trending more towards a global system, but it's not there yet. And it's definitely not there in the mentality and the mindset of people who are, over 30 years old for sure. But even in their 20s, they still have a lot of that. The younger people, the millennials that are coming up, the teenagers, they're less attached to more traditional Chinese culture.
mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at the China as a market, this is where it's important to understand demographics. In China, so here we look at demographics, what are the ages, what are the sexes, what are the ethnicities or the races. In China it's the same, but it makes even a bigger impact. Depending on when you were born, 5 years is a completely different mentality or mindset, right?
Wow.
Because of Chinese history.
Mm-hmm.
You had what happened to China during the Communist Revolution in 1949. Then you had the Cultural Revolution. Then you had the death of Mao and the quote unquote opening up of China to the West. You had this period after the Cultural Revolution of famine where a lot of people starved to death because there's no food. There's just so much in Chinese history that depending on how old you are and how old your parents were during that period of time, that affected your kind of perspective and outlook in life. So in China, they classify people by when they were born. Were you born in the 70s? Were you born in the 80s? Were you born in the 60s? Were you born in the 90s? And then it wasn't 10 years was too large because it captured too many people. So then it became, 95, 2005, 2000. Every 5 years became an increment where you had a completely different social class of people in China. And if you're marketing consumer goods in China, it's important to understand what the size of those demographics are and what their preferences are when you market to them. So in China, it's just a whole complex set of things that foreign leaders and foreign managers have to learn. Not only about the market and the culture, but also about what adjustments they have to make. For example, how do you train yourself not to think in black and white and yes and no? How does that happen? Like if you're 50 years old and you've been doing this your entire life, you've had a 30-year career, and this is how you've been successful, how do you suddenly adjust that when you go to China? Because it's not something you prepare for. It's a mindset that when you're communicating and you're faced with these questions, you're not answering them yes or no. You're taking a step back and almost doing what the customs people do, where you'll think about it, you'll consider it, and then you don't give an answer. Americans have this tendency to think that when people ask them a question in business, you need an answer. I have to tell you yes or no. In China, it doesn't work like that. It's better almost just to say, I'll think about it and I'll let you know, and just leave it open, and leave it open indefinitely. And that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, I can see where that would be a very difficult transition for somebody from here to adapt.
Yeah.
Because we are basically, considering accomplishing our goals.
We're very goal oriented.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're also very, KPI driven, and kind of this is a lot of short term kind of thing. It's almost like Wall Street. What are the quarterly numbers look like, and then you respond to that. What adjustments do we have to make?
Right.
In China, it's not so much that you don't care about the quarterly results. It's all about having a mindset that is more long term. Because when you've adjusted your mindset to think more long term, the responses that you give to the stakeholders that you're communicating with will be different. When you're thinking long term, nobody can predict the future. But if you want to kind of leave all options on the table, that mindset will help you not respond in terms of yes or no. It's almost like, I want to leave all options on the table. I don't know how things are going to evolve. Even though that's not morally ethical by my American standards, but I'm not going to close my mind to that. I'm not going to agree to it, but I'm not going to say no. That's the best response.
Well, you said that typically it is about money. Are there other areas that can be part of the game plan, so to speak?
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. In China, because of the way that China has evolved in the last 30 years, it's just become a capitalistic, money-hungry society kind of on steroids. Everybody thinks wealth defines their status in the society. So everybody's seemingly doing everything for money. So the question that you asked is there something other than money? There's one thing that Chinese people value more than money, and that is their face. Okay, their mianzi. So that is where foreigners have an advantage, because foreigners have a lot of mechanisms to give Chinese face. Right? When a foreigner acknowledges a Chinese person in front of their peers, that's giving them face. When foreigners bring Chinese into their inner circle, that's giving them face. So for example, Europeans like to smoke cigars, for example. Okay, so when the European business leaders, they travel to China, they have their meetings during the day, and then kind of if they go out to dinner, and then after dinner, you know, they send the Chinese home and they go out and they have their brandy and they smoke their cigars, and they have their kind of internal inner circle kind
Their
of
me time.
their me time. Well, if you bring a Chinese person into that activity, that's a huge show of respect, and that's a tremendous offer of goodwill. That may be even more valuable than giving them a raise or giving them a bonus, especially in altering their behavior.
So a system of rewards that aren't sincere but not necessarily cash oriented can be very effective.
Absolutely. If you understand the Chinese mind, so I teach this thing called a mindset for China business. It's a workshop, it's also a class. If you understand how Chinese people think and what they value, and of course, if you're empathetic to Chinese people, then you automatically know. If you're not and you're new, the key is to focus more on that, to be curious, right? Use your imagination. Why do Chinese people care about this? Why do they think like that? Use your imagination. Be curious. I call it purpose-driven curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Be curious about why other people respond a certain way with purpose. And the thing that I always tell my clients is, we always talk about what is the opposite of this and what is the opposite of that. So the opposite of being curious is being, do you know what it is?
Well, I would say it would be something akin to ignoring, would be just not concerned at all.
Well, that is, the opposite of being curious is also being, to ignore somebody.
Yeah.
That is an opposite. But there's another thing that I think is the opposite of being curious. It's being judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you're not curious why, then you're judging them why. You're judging them based on your own system of values. This is right, this is wrong. But if you're curious why they may do things, and you're open-minded how in a certain cultural context that wouldn't be morally unethical, then that's purpose-driven curiosity. If you don't have that, then you're just basically judging people.
How does the family interact? I mean, what would be the occasion where a business relationship, as we've been talking about, and putting somebody in China in a position of importance, and including their family in social gatherings and things like that, is that common or is that uncommon?
It's very common, and it's also a great gesture. Chinese have this hierarchical kind of way to classify what is the guanxi. Okay, so the closest guanxi is obviously your spouse and your family, and then the next level is kind of your extended family, and the next level is kind of like close friends, like fraternity brothers, people you went to school with, and then good acquaintances, and then no guanxi. So there's kind of this way to measure how close a guanxi relationship is. And the thing that you just observed or pointed out is the closest level of guanxi is always family. So extending goodwill to family is also a great gesture. Like if you have company outings where you say, okay, we're going to do team building, we're all going to go to have a vacation, and then you're allowed to bring family members. This is nothing new. So the multinational companies who hire consultants and hire advisors to set up their people performance and incentive system,
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that. Company paid vacations, bring your family, company paid dinners. One of the things they always do, like during Chinese New Year, is they give vouchers for moon cakes and for stuff like that. You give it to their employees, bring it to their families.
What is a moon cake?
A moon cake is what they give out during Moon Festival. So China has a lot of their holidays. And during Moon Festival, people eat moon cakes. And everything about that is an opportunity to generate goodwill and reciprocity. So as a business owner, whether you're just like a small startup or you're a large multinational company, during these Chinese holidays, these are opportunities for you to extend goodwill. Okay, so for example, during Moon Festival, Chinese companies will buy these vouchers really expensive, like either at Starbucks, where they have this big kind of box of moon cakes that's really nicely packaged and looks really expensive. Haagen-Dazs, all of these kind of foreign companies now who are operating in China, like Starbucks and Haagen-Dazs, they'll take advantage of these holidays and create these really nice and expensive gifts. And they'll sell them to businesses, and businesses will just buy tons of these because these are great things to give to their employees. And what you'll see is this is like a windfall for these foreign companies. And if they don't understand that this is part of the Chinese culture, then they miss out on this huge money-making opportunity, right? And the thing is you'll see that, when people go to redeem these vouchers, they just have stacks and stacks of these boxes, ornamental boxes of these really nicely prepared mooncakes. And there'll just be a line, hundreds of people just in line at Starbucks or at Haagen-Dazs just to retrieve their mooncakes. And what you can do is inside these ornamental boxes that people will keep, you can put like little vouchers or coupons or promotional things inside the box. So when this is going to all of their family, they also get this kind of thing. Oh, I can go back to Starbucks and get 5% off on my next coffee. Mm-hmm. And it's just, if you understand all of these opportunities, then Chinese companies are playing this game. So foreign companies have to learn also how to play this game in order to compete, or they're losing out on tons of almost free sales opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, it's an amazing difference between the two countries, and it does take a referee.
It takes a referee and it takes a coach.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever traveled to China before?
I have not.
Okay. Based on our conversation, have you learned anything about China?
Yes, I have. I think that, of course, I came and I tend to have an open mind on things. So, I am curious about other societies, and I also am very respectful of other societies. So, I look for those differences and try to honor them, not go against them, because that's not the way I was raised.
Well, that's two really good tips that you just offer to anybody going to China. Just be curious and just be respectful. If you can start with those two characteristics in yourself, curiosity and respect, then you're basically, I would say, starting off on the right foot, so to speak.
Very good.
All right. Well, thank you for having this conversation.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you.
it was great talking to you.
Yeah.
All right.